Hello and welcome to LinkedIn Live. Today we're going to be talking about the future of the project profession. My name's Adam Boddison. I'm the Chief Executive of Association for Project Management, and thank you for joining us today. So in terms of what we plan to cover for today, I want to spend just a few minutes saying something about APM as an organisation, first of all, and then I really want to get into the meat of the session, which is going to be about the future of the project profession and what we think is facing us in terms of challenges, what the future may hold, and therefore what we need to do about it. You obviously have the ability to ask questions and put comments in the chat, and at the end of the session I'll come to those comments and we'll see what questions we can answer. So first of all, we are APM, Association for Project Management, the only chartered membership organisation for the project profession in the world, something we are extremely proud of. And as you can see, we're not just a membership body, but we're also a registered charity. And that's important because it means it's not just about our members and our corporate partners that we need to think about, but ultimately everything we do is around public benefit. And that's why I really like the kind of tagline that we've got, which came with our recent rebrand, which you can see in bold at the bottom of this slide here, which is because when projects succeed, society benefits. So ultimately, everything that we do around improving the effectiveness of project delivery and improving project outcomes, ultimately it's all about that long-term benefits realization piece for society, which is obviously very, very important. Our mission as an organisation, as I say, is to advance the science, theory and practice of project and programme management for public benefit. So you can see how that fits in. And why do we do that? It's because of this vision where we have a world in which all projects succeed. Now, we've got a kind of one-page overview here of our strategic framework, some of which I've just talked about. And you can also see on here our values as an organisation, which we try to live both internally and externally through all we do. And at the bottom of the slide here, you can see our 4 strategic themes. Now, for each of those themes, we have a kind of set of sub-themes here. So APM provides leadership of the profession, which is about leveraging charter and status, having the right partnerships and being progressive. We've got APM as a professional body for all project professionals, about helping us to identify and enable the right skills for the project professional, which is obviously very much around the digital side of things, as well as having an approach that's scalable and sustainable. And lastly, about us being an outstanding professional body, delivering excellence in all that we do. Now, I recognise I've gone through those slides pretty quickly, and what you will have in the chat in a moment is a link to the strategy document, which has all of the detail on that in for you to look at your leisure. But I just wanted to introduce that to you today rather than to spend too much time on those opening slides. So what I really wanted to talk about today is this, the future of the project profession. As I say, I'm going to do this by thinking about 4 areas. The profile of the profession in terms of how we perceive it at the moment, how easy is it to access the profession, what we think is coming down the line, and therefore what we should do about it. So first of all, the profile of the project profession. I've chosen 3 groups of people here to think about what the profile of profession looks like for these 3 different groups. And the first group I want to talk about is the general public, which fits in with what I said before about our public benefit aims. And I think it's really interesting that the only time that the general public really hears about projects in the media is when they go wrong. So this is called by some colleagues I've met as a kind of trial by media. So we never hear about the projects that go well. They tend to be invisible. So if I think about, for example, something like the electronic prescription service. So you remember that you used to go to your GP, and if you needed a prescription, they would handwrite it for you and you would take it to the pharmacy to get your prescription. And now that's all done automatically. Now that just happened. You probably weren't even consciously aware of it. Just one day, it just moved from one system to another. There was no great big news announcement, no kind of blowing of trumpets about everything that was happening there, because it went well. But other projects where they're challenging, particularly where they're late or overspent in terms of the budget, we hear a lot about them. And that means the general public have a view that all projects fail or a lot of projects fail. And I think that's something we need to challenge, and we need to be much more positive about celebrating the successes. I think part of the challenge here is that the project professionals will often want to take the approach of learning lessons when things go wrong, which is absolutely right. But in doing that and really focusing on what we can improve, sometimes I think we miss a trick, which is to be really ambassadorial for our profession. We've then got leaders, and just to be clear here, I'm not necessarily talking here about leaders of project delivery organizations, because of course they get project management and project delivery. But I'm thinking here about leaders more broadly. And I think it's interesting that project management does not have an equivalent status to other strategic professions in most organizations. And by other strategic professions, I'm referring to, for example, HR, marketing, and finance. So to be a leader, I think there's a kind of common understanding that you should have at least a basic capability in HR, marketing, and finance. You might not need to be an expert in them. You know, they're not suggesting that to be a leader, you need to be a chartered accountant or something like that. But actually, there is that base level. That equivalence does not extend to project management, and I think that should be a fourth pillar of MBA programs, for example. Because most strategies are actually about the leadership of change. And if you go back to what leadership was about 50 years ago, it was mostly business as usual with a very small amount of organizational change. And now that's completely turned on its head. And I think most of leadership now is about the delivery of change. And if that's the case, then actually project management has a really important role to play in the delivery of those strategies. So I think that needs to happen. And a good place to start is MBA programs. So not having project management kind of scattered to the wind with bits of it all over the place. So stakeholder management in one place or risk in another place, actually bringing that all together and not having it as an elective, but having it as a core part of MBA programs. And then lastly, let's talk about the government. And sometimes when we hear about government, again, they sometimes have a bit of a trial by media as well, I suppose, because it's often bad news that's reported in that place. But I think what's interesting is that the Infrastructure and Projects Authority have really been a force for good within government, and have really helped the government, I think, to be much more progressive as far as project delivery is concerned. Of course, there is still more to do, but I think they are really leading the charge in trying to standardise and grow the expectation in terms of project delivery capability across all of government, and I think that's really good what's happening there. But ultimately, the challenge we've got is that the project profession is not yet seen universally as a profession in its own right, like some of those more established and mature professions. And that's really what we are trying to do as the professional body. So just in terms of the scale of the profession, and there's some interesting stats here which came from our Golden Thread report, which we published in 2019. So the figures may have grown a little bit since then, but PwC published this a couple of years ago. And it talks about the fact that there are more than 2 million project professionals in the UK, which is a staggering figure when you think about it. So it really is a sizable profession. And when you start to think about the kind of economic impact of that, you see that the profession itself adds 156.5 billion gross value added per year. Now, to put that in context, we heard a lot about the importance of the City of London during the Brexit negotiations. The entirety of the City of London at the time that this piece of work was done was 101 billion gross value added. So we're talking about a profession that's 50% bigger than the City of London. So it gives you some sense of the scale that you hear here. And then just in terms of what that means in terms of the overall GVA, it's actually at 8.9% of it, which is pretty significant. And then, of course, in terms of the amount of people who are employed, who are in the profession in some way, shape or form, it's 7.9%. So really quite significant in terms of its importance, and probably doesn't get enough credit, doesn't get enough gravity for the importance that it has. So a few kind of global research insights which are quite interesting here, again, just on the scale. So the first one is about the profession is estimated to be worth over 20 trillion US dollars per year, which is Very, very significant again in terms of the size of that. There's also this research that says we're going to need 88 million project professionals in 5 years' time globally. Now, we are nowhere near that figure at the moment. So we've got a significant amount of work to do both in the UK and overseas to make sure we both have the right volume of professionals, but also that they are able to deliver to the standards required. So there's a real global challenge there to face some of the global challenges that the world has got. And when it comes to project success, and I talked about this at the beginning, there's quite a lot of difference of opinion about what proportion of projects are successful. At one extreme, you've got 0.5% of projects are successful, which is, a pretty damning indictment of project success. I think it's quite pessimistic, in my opinion. But then at the other extreme, you've got someone saying 35% of projects are successful. Now, I think a lot of this comes down to what we mean by project success. So if we're just talking about the iron triangle of kind of time, cost, quality, then that's one thing. But for me, I think we've got to be much better at looking at the long term and long-term benefits realization and the impact that projects have, as I said, on society over time. And I think when we start looking at project success from that perspective, it would be somewhat different. Okay. So in terms of access to the project profession, I think we've got to do much more to improve diversity within the profession. Now, part of the challenge we've got, of course, is that the profession itself has come from some industries like construction, for example, and infrastructure, where they were more male-dominated, for example. That said, the profession is genuinely a pan-sector profession, and I think overall it probably is quite diverse, but that's not yet represented fully in the APM membership, and it's something we're particularly working on. The other important point, I think, is around social mobility, which is interesting, which is that we published some research called Dynamic Conditions of Project Success, which shows that diversity has a really important role to add in terms of project outcomes. But actually, projects themselves can improve and be a catalyst for social mobility. So there's a bit of a kind of virtuous circle there, which I think is really powerful, and the profession both adds value and delivers value at the same time. When you compare the project profession to other professions, it's much more complex. So if I use the example of the medical profession here, if you want to be a doctor, you've got to go to medical school. You become a junior doctor. You can then become a qualified GP, and you may choose to specialise. It's a fairly linear route on the whole. But when you come to the project profession, yes, that linear route exists, and we've got some of our qualifications here leading all the way up to, for example, Chartered Project Professional Standard. But actually, there are so many other ways in. So some people are sector specialists, and they kind of find that they wake up one day and they were a chartered surveyor, but actually they suddenly realise they're doing project management. Some people are accidental project managers. They're doing a project role and may not even realise it. There's people on apprenticeship routes. So there's all these different routes, career changes. So you've got people who are senior in another career and then kind of come across sideways. So it's so much more complex, I think, to think about how you develop a profession which has that level of complexity. Someone's asked a question about how, do we know the sectors that employ the most project managers? And just to reflect on that very briefly, it's actually finance and professional services in the UK, which employs far more project professionals than any other sector. When we think about access to the profession, we know that we need project professionals who are competent, who have the right knowledge base, who understand the concepts involved in project delivery, and also importantly have that experience. But I think we don't hear enough about the role of creativity in delivering projects, because often there are some quite intangible and intractable problems that need to be thought about. And this isn't creativity just in terms of another way of thinking about things. It's a whole different mindset. So to kind of explain what I mean by that, I'll just very briefly share an anecdote about my daughter. And when she was much younger, kind of 5 or 6 years old, we were at the point where we thought we're going to have to start teaching her about safety in a kitchen, because she was starting to kind of investigate and explore things, and we thought we want to keep her safe. And we said to her, what would be dangerous in a kitchen? And I was expecting that she might talk about boiling water or sharp knives or I don't know, slip hazards on the floor, something like that. And when I asked her what would be dangerous in the kitchen, she said to me, a motorbike. A motorbike would be very dangerous in the kitchen. I thought, well, yeah, that's a really good, that would be dangerous in the kitchen. But the point I'm making there, she was thinking at a completely different level than what I was thinking. And that's the essence of the kind of creativity and innovation that's sometimes needed in projects. And I think it leads us to ask some quite interesting questions about how we capture that. So it's not accidental creativity, if you like, but I think it's an important point. The other thing around access to the profession, which I think is interesting, is if you look at this McKinsey study from 2021, which was just looking at the changes between 2019 and 2020 in terms of the skills that companies have chosen to prioritize in their organization. And when you look at this, there are a few observations. First of all, you'll see that project management is the fastest growing area of investment in terms of skills development from 2019 to 2020. And I'd be interested to see whether that trend has continued. And I don't know whether to be pleased or not about this, because there's part of me that says, yes, this is a demonstration that project management has been recognized as a really important area for organizations to invest in. But there's a bit of me that also says, yes, but we think we can do that by just sending somebody on a course rather than truly building up our project delivery capability in a more strategic way. So I find myself slightly conflicted on that, and maybe some people will have thoughts and comments on that. So a look ahead to the future then. So one of the things we hear a lot about is the rise of artificial intelligence. Of course, AI is already with us. So I'm not for a moment suggesting we're not already there, but of course it will develop and develop and develop. And one of the opinions that sometimes I hear associated with artificial intelligence is, Adam, we won't need project managers anymore because artificial intelligence can do it all for us, because they say they can make really well-informed decisions based on data. And actually those decisions are going to be better than the decisions that people would make. So we don't need project managers anymore. I think those people are wrong. And the reason I think those people are wrong is because if I ask people to reflect on a project that's gone really, really well, or a project that's been really, really challenging and hasn't gone so well, and what was the thing that made the difference? Was it people or was it processes? I always get the same answer, which is, yeah, it was people. So processes are important, of course, but it's often people that are the determining factor and a critical factor in terms of project success. So if AI comes along and actually starts to automate a lot of those processes, I don't think that removes the need to have good people. I think it amplifies the importance of having really effective, good people in those project roles. So I think AI is actually going to have the opposite effect to some of those opinions that I've heard in that space. And then the final point on the future of the project profession here is just around project data analytics, a really important part of project controls, of course. And one of the things that I think we need to grapple with as an organisation is the extent to which we need to build digital literacy, data literacy within the project profession, so that our project professionals are more competent in project data analytics and how they use data, compared to, for example, whether we should be just better at working with the profession itself, that is the data analysts, and actually is it just about how we work in collaboration with them that's actually more important. Of course, in practice it will be a little bit of both, but I think thinking about that the extent and the balance of that is going to be quite an important issue for the future. Okay, final slide. I think is just about what balance we want to have between being a strategic profession versus a technical profession. So what do I mean by this? So I think if you ask people who are not in the profession what they think project managers do, they often think of it as quite a technical role. So they might think of engineers, they might think of people who are doing construction projects and so on. So they think it's quite a specialist role, which and of course there are those roles in the profession. So it almost becomes equivalent to those other specialist areas and technical areas like IT, like legal, like health and safety. But increasingly, I'm seeing the emergence of another part of the profession, which is a strategic aspect to project management, and that would make it more akin to finance, marketing, and HR. So if I use marketing as an example, 30, 40 years ago, marketing was almost, and I don't mean this in a disrespectful way, but it was almost a backroom function where your C-suite would make decisions, and then they'd pass it through to the back room for the marketers to do the advertising campaign and so on. Not anymore. You've got chief marketing officers now at the boardroom table driving strategy. And I'm seeing that increasingly with projects as well, and project professionals. Those professionals, chief project officer, chief transformation officer, are driving strategy in the boardroom. So what do we need in the future in terms of that balance between us being a strategic profession versus a technical profession? You may have some views on that. Okay. I'm going to stop talking there. We've got to the kind of 20-minute point, and I wanted to leave some time for questions. So I'm going to go over to the chat now, and I can see that we've got a number of questions in here, which I will try and pick some out. So a few people just agreeing with some of the points that have been made there. So saying that there needs to be awareness of the uniqueness of the project profession. I agree. I agree with that. So thank you for that point. Some people echoing the point around project failure and project success. So someone's asked about what the strategy is at a local branch level, which I think is a reference to APM, Association Project Management, and the branches that we have, which are kind of regional branches across the UK. And we also have a branch in Hong Kong. So every year we have obviously a central set of strategies and a strategic plan. And what we do is we share that with the branches, and actually each of the branches will think about how they are going to contribute to that overall plan. That said, each of the local branches will also have things which are very specific to their local area, because what's going on up in, for example, the Cumbria district, where we've got places like Sellafield and BAE Systems in Barrow-in-Furness up there, it might be quite different to what's going on in other parts of the country. So actually there needs to be a kind of local aspect of that as well. Someone said, do we know the sectors that employ most project managers? And I briefly referenced earlier on the kind of finance and professional services. The other thing I would also just say there, which is a surprise, is hospitality and leisure, health and pharmaceuticals, and life sciences. These are also big areas as well. And construction and IT and some of the ones that you would expect are in there, but they're not necessarily as high up as you might think. But they are the areas which are probably most mature in terms of their embracing the project profession, which I think is interesting. So there's definitely learning we can take from them. Helen, let's have a look at your point. So you said it's challenging getting a role in the PMOs, that's Project Management Office, as an international student. What can I do to get a role in the PMO? So look, if you're part of the APM community, we have specific interest groups, and we have events which cover a whole range of different topics, and PMO is certainly something that comes up quite a lot. So I'd actively encourage you to get involved with that. The other thing is we have a mentoring program as well, which is you can find more about on the APM website. But there's a kind of community app where you can actually access some of the mentors as well, and kind of look through their profiles, and maybe selecting a mentor who's actually already in that PMO space might be a really good thing to think about, Helen. So thank you very much for that question. So Donato has said, is Agile on a trajectory to replace classical approaches to project management? That's a really interesting question about Agile. And I noticed that you've used Agile with a small a rather than a capital A. Because what I'm seeing increasingly is less evangelicalism, if that's the right phrase, on specific project methodologies, and much more agility in terms of moving between different project methodologies, sometimes within the same project itself, because when the context changes, sometimes the methodological approach needs to change as well. So I don't think any one project methodology is going to have all of the answers, and I think the best and most effective project professionals are going to have a real suite of approaches available to them. Right, Mark says, unless AI can replace the EQ and EI. So we're talking about emotional intelligence there, that human project manager can bring to a project. Project managers will still be essential. I completely 100% agree with that, Mark. And it's very interesting. I was involved in a conversation yesterday where we were talking about whether AI would ever get to the point where it could be emotionally intelligent. And I think my own conclusion on that is that it can probably replicate some aspects of emotional intelligence. But I think that the kind of human power, if you like, is always going to be more optimal. So I agree with your point. And George, I think, has then just added some warm words to that as well, in agreeing with that. So thank you for that. Okay, someone's asked, is APM endorsing any project management software tools? So we don't actually endorse any software tools. Our corporate partners use a whole range of different tools. What we don't do is necessarily say that one is better than the other, and so much of it is contextual. But what we have got, and we have had before, is people write about their experience of using different tools. So that's something we can certainly look at flagging for you in terms of providing some links on that. Okay, what else have we got in here? Are there any dedicated paths planned for project support and specialist roles like project controls? Further certifications are hard to gauge. So yes, really good question. So we have our specialist certificates, of which we only have one at the moment, which is around major project leadership, and we do plan to expand that to cover more specialist roles. But we also have something what was called our kind of what is pages on the APM website, which I think is a really great start for some of these specialist areas. So when you go to that, it gives you a whole range of different areas, which includes project data analytics, project sponsorship, for example, and some of these areas you're talking about. And it gives you both a kind of description of what it is, but then talks about this is the kind of content that APM has on those areas. So it might be books that we've published, it might be training resources, it might be articles from the journals or the magazines and so on. So I think that's always a really good start for some of those more specialist areas. And of course, we do work with a range of partners and organisations that have more specialism in different areas as well. So someone said, what advice would you give to professionals looking to pivot to project management? I think the thing to do is, one, definitely do it, I would say. But I think it's really understand what it is that you're getting into, because I think there's a perception of project management which is in the general public, which doesn't reflect the reality. And I think the reality is actually much more exciting, much more interesting, much more impactful than people think. So I would definitely say they should do that. And we've got some great resources on the APM website again, which kind of gives some insight into what the role is all about. Right, so we've got lots of questions coming in now. I can see, oh, brilliant. So some useful links coming in there. Will this presentation be available for viewing later? I think you can come back and look at the presentation. Yes. So I think that covers all of the questions. So we have finished with about 1 minute to spare. So there probably is time if anyone wants to ask one last question, if you want to squeeze one in. So I shall wait for a moment and see if there's any sneaky questions coming in. No, in which case I think we will wrap up there then. So thank you very much for coming along and taking the time to come today. I hope you have learned something about APM and something about the profession itself and the challenges coming down the line. And coming back to my point earlier on about the kind of call to action, my challenge to everybody here today is, as a result of watching this presentation today, what would you do differently now in terms of helping us to tackle some of those challenges? Okay, so thank you very much.